It takes a lot to call a design a failure, but more to explain your reasoning why you consider it so. Words without substance are just words. Too often you will hear people telling you that they like the watch or hate the piece, but seldom do they explain their reasoning, provide you with a concrete answer why. And this is one area that I try to emphasize with these discussions, and I hope they resonate with all of you. Do I think the Code 1159 is a total and irreversible failure? Absolutely not. There is a lot of potential with this watch, untapped potential, but there are issues, many issues with the watch's design language. This is going to be a critical discussion. I may even be harsh, but tough love is needed, because we know all too well that Audemars Piguet is a remarkable brand. Though the majority of the pieces they now sell fall into the Royal Oak territory, it does not mean that they haven't had successes in the past. Here is the reality. When it comes to creating anything, even before the pencil has been put to paper, you need to clarify what you are creating. By that I mean, of course you are designing a watch, but what kind of watch? As I highlight in the video appearing in the corner now, one I highly suggest you look at if you are interested in buying your next watch. When it comes to choosing a watch, there are only two camps to choose from at first: sports or dress watches. In the case of designing, it is important to really hone in on what DNA you are putting into the watch. And in the case of the Code 1159, this is where many people find conflict. Many won't be able to express the thought, but simply put, there is too much of sport and dress in this watch for it to come across clearly as either one or the other. Before getting into the discussion, I will link to Audemars Piguet's page highlighting the 1159 in the corner, because it has been expertly designed, and it is well worth your attention if you want to see the technicalities behind these pieces. I want to discuss the positives of the watch first, and frankly there are a lot of positives. The movement is a thing of beauty, but being Audemars Piguet, I don't think that should come as a surprise. The caliber has been entirely reinvented, and there is a gorgeous diagram on their website to look at. Let's move to the design of the case. The finishing, contrasting with the highly brushed and polished lines, the thought of paying homage to the Royal Oak in a way with 8 sharpened sides in the center of the case, it is gorgeous. And the cherry on the cake are the lugs, and how they have been machined. This to me is the absolute highlight of the watch. Simple, industrial, refined, but also tasteful. It's almost as if from the front the watch appears classical, but on any off angle or viewing it isometrically, you get this taste of a modern piece. The sapphire crystal also holds an interesting innovation to its name, incorporating a new process that improves its viewing angle. Then talking about the dials. Of all the watches in the lineup, only one dial complements the case in my eye, and that is the fully skeletonized tourbillon, also known as the open work tourbillon. It is absolutely beautiful. I'm not just saying that because it's the most complicated and most expensive movement, but because of the architecture of the dial. All of its components and lattices tie so well into how the case has been constructed, specifically how the lugs meld into the movement architecture. Just take it in. All that said, now to the critique. The understanding of knowing whether it is a sports watch or a dress watch is not clearly defined, and that is what creates this clash. And the root cause of the disparity can be seen on the dials. Just looking at the basic dial of the watch that incorporates both batons and numerals. Oh boy. The typeface chosen for the numerals at the 12, 3, 6 and 9, as much as I would not like to admit, they were not the ideal choice. I say this for a few reasons. First, as a font, they will not stand the test of time. For lack of a better word, they look dated. Open 6s and 9s that also lack any kind of serif, in this example, will not age well. The second reason, well, they look way too modern. And when paired next to the thin batons, they clash. Then the needle hands also look to be components from a dress watch and not a sports watch. But the numerals tell you that this watch is trying to be a sports watch. The date placement between the 4 and the 5 position is a nice touch, but adding numerals around the dial at every 5-minute increment, the look for my eye just doesn't meld together. The chronograph. This watch does it better with batons and the overall layout. But the 12 again just doesn't blend with the simplicity of the rest of the dial. The perpetual calendar has been handled well, and so has the tourbillon. But the base models, some things are just left lacking. And I never thought I would say this about a watch design, but the entry-level pieces, they look cheesy. The proportions of the watch could have been better if they were smaller in diameter. And seeing the sheer amount of open space between the numerals on the dial explains this when seeing it on the wrist. If there is one thing that puts me off a watch dial, is an abundance of unused space. I would even say that this watch would have benefited from more text on the dial, maybe some texture to it. But these models, in their current size on the wrist, they seem, for lack of a better word, bare. And then moving to the numerals and how they interact on some models. I know that the black dial variants are notorious for poor legibility, since every surface of the numerals and batons are highly polished and makes reading the watch difficult in harsh light. Without question, of all the watches in the lineup, I would take the Tourbillon, simply because it is the clearest expression of the watch. The dial on the entry-level pieces, for my eye, do not do the case justice. Believe me, as someone who is creative, I know how hard it is to differentiate a product. Bringing an entirely new line to market is daunting, especially when the model is in the wake of a piece that has been celebrated for almost half a century. It is hard not to be in its shadow, but AP have been able to create phenomenal pieces in the past. And this example shows that they are willing to revitalize their classical line with a more modern touch. I see it as a pity when people cannot find positives in something, and as I hope you have seen, there are some amazing innovations with this watch. The case is just one example, but the dials have let a lot of these pieces down. So as a redesign, it is difficult to know where to go. If I had a month to work on it, maybe the result would have been less cliched, but in this example, I propose that the dial keeps a more classical form, removing the numerals on the dial, removing the numerals on the chapter ring, and keeping the batons, matching with the watch's hands. The size of the watch could have been brought down to around 38 or 39 millimeters, and possibly loom could have been added to the batons and the hands too. It does look fairly plain, but this formula works. As a first-generation piece, it is a better way to aim the attention to the finer details, like the case and the movement. After the watch has seen success, then the dial innovation can take over. So the Code 1159 is not a design failure, but in more ways than I would like to admit, it fails to excite. I admire that AP has been able to push for a new line of pieces, but the creation of a line like this should have been treated more carefully and with more restraint. The process of defining what the watch should be needs to take precedence over anything else, and the resulting watch does not know what it wants to be. Leaving it open-ended for the consumer to decide results in a neutral answer, and in the watch game, neutrality does not bode well for a long life.